for database compatibility and feature parity. Provide the source database. Let's say I'm using the same source database once again. And let's say this time I want to publish pubs database, not the Northwind database. So this is the pubs database. Let's start the assessment. You will notice it's the same issue again. In case of managed instance also, you cannot use Windows authentication. Windows authentication is a feature not supported by managed instance also. And for other database compatibility, please remember why I'm not getting any data compatibility issues. Any reason for that? Hello? It's because my source database and my destination database, they are both SQL Server 2022. That means my source and destination databases are already compatible with each other. They are using exact same SQL Server version. Okay, so there is no issue of any kind of compatibility issues at all. But please remember, your real-time migration is never this easy. Your real migration will not be this easy. You know why? Most of the time, the database you will be migrating would be an old database, and there would be several objects which may not actually support this migration, right? If you are just using database schema, that won't be an issue. But what if you are using some other database object like stored procedures, functions, triggers? Rather, you are using a programming APIs there. Those features may not be compatible with your target database. So what you will do in that case? You might have to refactor your local database. You might have to make it compatible with the target database. Okay. And after you make the necessary changes, just rerun the assessment. Are you getting my point? What you have to do is just rerun the assessment. Now, what happens after you rerun the assessment? The assessment will again check all the parameters. And if parameters are compatible, it will create a report like this. Any question, query about DMA, Data Migration Assistant?
So if we have old database, we have to offline make it compatible. Then only we can schedule the
Yes.
migration.
See, you have to make it compatible first, or what you can do is you can determine whether those features are actually required. Okay. See, remember one thing, with many of our old legacy application and database, many a time they contain code or objects which are never in use. Okay. Which are actually no longer in use. There might be some unused object which might be creating this conflict. So in that case, you can simply delete them and your database and your application will continue to function. So you have to do this. And that's why this tool provides you a separate migration assessment report. Okay, don't do an immediate migration, run an assessment. Again, even the migration assessment might take time for a larger database. Right now, I'm trying this on a smaller sample databases. That's why it took just few seconds for the report to get generated. Okay. If you get multiple errors, multiple migration, let's say compatibility issues, you might have to rerun the migration assistant. Also, please remember, if you need additional features which are not available in, let's say, SQL database, Azure SQL database, the PaaS service, then you should go back to managed instance. If there are certain services which are not even available in managed instance, then you should use the SQL Server VM option. Now, how many times in your SQL PL/SQL script or in your procedures do you make use of files and folders from local machine? Do you have any kind of SQL script where you need to read some file from C drive on D drive? If you have something like that, then you cannot use any other option and you have to go back to SQL Server VM, SQL Server on virtual machine option. But did you notice one thing? We didn't get that migration option here in DMA tool. Oh, sorry, there was an option SQL Server to SQL Server. But the chances of migration failing here are extremely less. Let's say, for example, I'm just trying an assessment here. Let's call it project 3. It's a database engine. You can even migrate integration services also, but if you select integration services, then of course it will not work with your this SQL Server database instance. Let's say SQL Server to SQL Server migration. This is for virtual machine migration. Okay, Windows authentication once again. And this time I want both the databases and there are no additional queries. Let's start. What is the target SQL Server edition? SQL Server Windows 2022. Let's see. Now I'm doing a scan for 2 databases instead of just 1. Let's wait for it. Obviously, this will be more positive than earlier too, because if it can support SQL database managed instance and SQL database, it will definitely support SQL database on a VM. Is that clear? Oh, wait a second. Looks like there are some issues here detected. Starting with database compatibility level 90 or higher, rare occasion, the unqualified join can cause missing join predicate. Looks like here I'm getting an issue. This was actually surprising. Anyways, can you see database migration assistant is not just showing an issue, but it is also giving you what objects are impacted and what is a possible fix or how possibly you can fix that. It is even giving you a way to possibly fix that as well. Is that clear? Hello? Okay, so there are few things and it is even giving us a way to fix that. So this is the original statement and this is the corrected statement. Okay, so instead of using this, you have to use this. And this is actually from the procedure. You can see here, there is a procedure that you need to modify. Procedure this, second procedure and third procedure. So these procedures here need to be modified. Okay. Now, please remember, this is just a behavioral change. There are no breaking changes. There are no deprecated features. And there is also an information here. These data types are deprecated. Okay. What are the data types deprecated now? Text, image, and end text are deprecated. And you should instead try something else. But looks like there is no recommendation or there is no fix available right now. Okay, and all this is only for Northwind. If I go to pubs database, similar exceptions or similar messages are there with pubs as well. Did you notice that? Now, there are no other issues. There are only compatibility issues. These are only database compatibility issues, I guess. Okay, I was actually expecting 0 issues here for this database. Let me check what database version I'm using right now. Let's go to the properties. Database setting. No, database setting will not show me anything. General. So currently I'm using SQL Developer Edition, and this is database version 16.0. Okay, this is database version 16.0. Okay. So this is how you can evaluate it, you can correct them, and then you can start the migration after you make the corrections. Okay. For entire virtual machine, there is a different type of migration tool available. Different tool is available to migrate entire machine with the operating system and everything. Okay. Right now here it has assumed target platform to be SQL Server Windows 2022. Okay, SQL Server on Windows Server 2022. This is one. So now we have three different projects here. First project, we are migrating to SQL database. Second project, we are migrating to managed instance. And in third one, we are planning to migrate to VM. Okay. Now these two issues, Windows authentication issue, you will never have this Windows authentication issue when migrating to VM. Is there any reason why it is not showing that uh, Windows integrity issue when migrating to Azure VM? Because Azure VM also supports Windows authentication. Windows authentication is not supported for managed instance, and Windows authentication is not supported for which other instance? The SQL database. Is that clear, everyone? So that kind of migration is currently uh, that kind of migration is not supported on managed instance and database. Okay, but you can even resolve that if you just create a new login user, a SQL authentication user for your local database, and then try to run the assessment again. Fine. What is next step? You did the migration. Now you can actually start the migration. How to start the migration? Let's create a migration project. Let's give it a name, Project 101. We are migrating SQL Server database to Azure SQL database. Okay, and you can see there are several options available now. Managed instance, SQL Server, and SQL Server on Azure VM. Here, let's provide migration scope, schema, and data. What is schema and data? What is schema only and what is data only? Can anybody explain me? Schema and data?
Schema and data is like definition with data.
Yes. Schema means the table definitions. Please remember in relational databases, in case of relational databases are structured databases. In relational databases, schema refers to the object declarations like table definitions, procedure definitions, functions, views, stored procedures, everything. So you define an object with all its attributes and constraint, and then you define or then you insert data into it. Do you know in RDBMS we have a separate type of SQL queries, DML queries and DDL queries. DDL is for defining the schema and DML is to insert record or add data to it. Yes. Now, please remember there are now three scenarios. Scenario number one, a simple greenfield migration. Greenfield means the target database is empty. There is nothing inside it. No data, no schema. Then you will use schema and data. So what it will do, it will take the entire schema. Now schema in MS SQL means tables, views, stored procedures, functions, right? Yes. All the database objects are included in schema. Okay. So schema and data both, or you can say that I want only the schema or schema, only schema when you just want to create the database structure and you are planning to migrate your data later on. Data only if you already know that target database already has the required schema and you are just replicating data to it, then use data only. Let's do one thing. For a time being, let's try schema only kind of a migration. So what kind of migration I'm doing right now? Hello?
Uh, Copying only the structure.
copying only the database structure. We are just going to migrate the database structure and nothing else. Now, how this migration will happen now? Let's see that. So what I'll do, I will start the migration. Let's click on the create project, migration project. Now for this migration project, wait a second, it's taking longer. Or maybe this entire interface is now not responding. Okay, let's wait for it. Yeah, done. Now let's provide the server name. Now this is for source database. Windows Authentication Trust Server Connect. Now let's select this database. Now remember the compatibility level here is database 16.0. Now, do you want to perform the assessment? I said yes, run the assessment first. When you do a migration, you do an assessment first. Then you have to provide the target server. Now, please remember one thing. There is one clear difference now. When doing an assessment, you can do an assessment without target server. You can do an assessment without target server, right? Yes? Hello? You can do an assessment without target server, but for actual migration, target server credentials are required. So let's provide the target server credentials now. So what I will do is I'll just go to my Azure portal and let me copy my database connection server. Okay, so this is my credentials, or this is my server URL. Then I'll connect using SQL authentication. So let's provide the username and password. Now this username and password and connection information is for target server. Okay, for target server. Let's trust the server connection and connect. So target server here, you will notice target server is also using SQL 16.0. And there is already a database here called my data. Did you notice that? Hello? Let's click next. Now, first thing DMA is going to do is it's actually going to give you an options to select. Now your source database is Northwind and your target database is my data one. Now, before I do migration, let me show you the details of my data. Okay, so what I'll do is let's go to this. This is my data 101. This is my data one. And you can see here there are no tables inside it. There are no at least user defined table. Notice that. What will happen after migration? All the tables from Northwind will appear here. Let's try that. So what all things you are trying to migrate? Now, please remember when I say schema object, you can migrate even the stored procedures. You can migrate tables. You can migrate views. You can migrate other components also like functions. Now, right now, you can choose what things you need to migrate and what things you do not want to migrate. Let's say, for example, for a time being, I don't want to migrate stored procedures. I want to migrate only the tables and views. Okay, so I select that and let's now hit this button, generate SQL script. Let's work for it. Schema migration is easy because it will just generate a DML schema. What it will do? It will generate the DML queries. Did you notice the DML queries here? Hello? You will also notice comment DMA schema migration deployment script with script date 2nd February. You can see the date and time when it was generated. This is the object called employees. Okay, and all the attributes with it. You will notice one thing, all that contains here is just the table create statement. And they are nicely created with if not exist statement. You know what is benefit of if not exist? No?
Yeah, it's in order to avoid override.
Right. If the object already exists, do not modify it. But if does not exist, only then create it. Okay. So fine. So now there is no need to copy and paste it anywhere. We have already provided target database credentials. Remember that? So now there is this button, deploy schema on right bottom corner. On my screen, right bottom corner, there is a button, deploy schema. Let's click on this button and wait for it. Now it will connect to database and try to create the schema objects. Now all the schema is deployed and you can see the log. You will notice one thing here, there are 0 errors. If there is an error, if any object cannot be migrated, you will get an error prompt on it. Anyway, everything is migrated, so we should be able to see everything here. Now let me refresh my data one. Oh, what happened now? Did you notice my data one now has all these tables? Yes. Can you see all the tables now? Let's compare these tables with Northwind database. Is it similar? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And here also we have same tables. Notice that? Territories was the last table here, and territories was the last table here as well. But all these tables are empty. If I go to this employees table, for example, let's say I want to select top 1000 records. It's empty, right? Is there any results here? I'm getting empty table because what I have migrated just now is only the schema I have migrated. Okay, what I have migrated right now is just the schema, not the data. And if required, I can even redeploy. Let's see what happens if I try to redeploy the schema. It will try to migrate it again. And because of that, if not exist parameter, this time it will not try to overwrite anything. It will just check if it already exists, do nothing. Already exists, do nothing. It will be like that. Looks like there were total 177 objects that got migrated. Is that clear? Hello? But I did not migrate any stored procedure here. So if you notice, tables are migrated. But if I go to this option here, programmability, stored procedure, there are no stored procedures here in data 1012. But if you go here to Northwind database, and inside Northwind database, if I go to programmability stored procedure, there are stored procedures here. How do I migrate these stored procedures from Northwind to this database? Let's try this one more time. Ready? Let's go back. Navigating, erase the current progress. That's fine. It's not going to delete tables, right? Let's not select table and views. Now this time I'm using the schema migration to migrate only the stored procedures. Okay, let's see if it can perform stored procedure only migration. Okay, so looks like there are total 28 stored procedures migrated right now with 0 errors. Let's go back and check inside a database. What I will do is I'll just refresh stored procedures. And suddenly I have all the procedures ready. This is called schema migration. Any question about schema migration, anyone? For large databases, you should first perform schema migration and then perform data migration, right? Those should be separate activities. And anyway, we don't always, kind of migration is a one-time activity, right? It's not like we are migrating our database every month. Hello? Migration should be one-time activity. Anyway, Yes, Ritesh. If it supports user object, it will migrate them as well. Okay, but right now I do not have any user object. We can try that as well. No worries. So now that it is done, but I believe if it is SQL database, right, user migration will not be supported there. We will try that. Okay, let's go back. Let's do one thing. Let's create users in my local SQL database. Northwind is my local database, and let's try to create a users here. Okay, how to create users? Go to security. Then from security, let's go to logins. And here I'll try to create a new login. Let's create a new login. Login name. Let's create a login with name King. Okay, and this is going to be an SQL authentication with password Kingdom. Kingdom. King is the username and Kingdom is the password. I don't want to enforce any password policy. Okay, and no certificate, nothing. So this will create a new login. Let's say, for example, King is the new user. Okay. Now let's do one thing for the Northwind database. Let's go to the properties of Northwind database. And for the properties, let's change the ownership permissions. Okay. Database name is Northwind and it is actually applicable to all the general public. Let's search for additional user called King. Okay. I found the user called object name King could not be found. Okay, I guess I should have created a user first and then login. What I have done is I have created a login, but I did not create a user. Am I right? Let's do one thing. Let's get inside the database. And inside the database, let's go to security. Then let's go to user and let's create a user here. Let's create a new user. Username is King and login name assigned here would be King. Default schema would be DBO, DBO schema. Okay, so this is a new user King. Okay, let's try now this. Now the Northwind database is updated. Let's try database migration assistant. And here in database migration assistant, let me go back to this assessment. How about we rerun this assessment now? Right click, restart the assessment. Okay, wait a second. The second assessment, I guess it's not running this assessment. Let's open the assessment here and try to rerun it. Restart the assessment. Okay, looks like database users mapped with this. Okay, that's the same issue basically. It's not actually generating any new issue. Okay, let's do one thing. Okay, I don't want to upload it. I will use a different migration project instead. Let's go back. Yes. I'm trying to migrate this database to this target database now. And let's connect. And let's click on next button. Let's see what all object types it will migrate. Did you notice it is actually migrating the user called King as well? Hello, Ritesh? So for your question, it is actually indeed allowing us to migrate the user object also. This user object also it is going to migrate. It's saying no issues found. You can migrate. Let's generate the SQL script for it. And let's see where and how it migrates that user object. So looks like, okay, so this is the complete details, categories, okay, other DB objects. Let's do one thing because there are so many things in here. Let's say, what if I just want to migrate user object and nothing else? Okay. Only the user object. Let's generate the SQL script. Okay, so looks like this is how it is going to create the user object. But you know what? This is actually going to give me an issue here. Hello. What would be the issue? You won't be actually able to log in with this user King. Reason is the logical SQL server or logical database that you have created, right? It doesn't have a user called King. So this will actually create an issue for us later on. Okay, let's try to deploy this. Let's see if it can deploy this. Looks like it's able to do that. And it is saying 4 commands, all the SQL commands successfully copied. Let's try to connect to my SQL database on Azure, which is this one. Let's refresh it, refresh, and under security logins. Okay, good. Did you notice it's able to detect the king? But can you see a small cross mark here? Red cross mark. What does it mean? Yes, anyone?
Is a button.
It's actually a kind of an incomplete object. Okay, this object actually is not enabled. This object is disabled. The reason is it requires a user account to be created on logical server, database.windows.net. So even though the migration tool did not actually show you any error, but when you try to actually log in with this user, it's going to fail. Okay. You cannot connect with user King. So this is going to be an issue. Database migration assistant will simply migrate it, import it like any other user object or any other database object. Okay. Yeah, I'll try that. I guess right now my database did not give me any issue because inside a database, I have logged in with Mahendra user, not with King user, right? Let's do one thing. Let's try to log in here with user King. Disconnect and let's connect again. Connect database engine. Okay, earlier I was connected using Mahendra user. Let's try to connect using user King. And password for King user is Kingdom. Okay, looks like there is an issue here. Okay, I was trying to connect King to this cloud data center. Let's try local database with username King and password Kingdom. Connection was, oh, sorry, this is certification error. Let's just say trust server certificate. Login failed. What's the reason for login failed? cannot connect. Login failed for user King. No, this doesn't work. This database login did not work. Oh, sorry, this one is using Windows authentication right now. My local database is right now using Windows authentication. Item has already been added. I'm not sure what error it is talking about. Yeah, here it is. So this database is logged in with uh, Windows administration. Login, I have created a login, but I'm not sure why it was not accepted here. This is the login, and there are no policies. Let me evaluate this. Default database here is master database. Login is king. Server role. Let's give this user server admin access. Okay. DB creator access. I'm giving this user more privileges now. This might allow this user to be accessible, right? And this is SA user right now. Let me just try to evaluate it. SA user currently is a sysadmin, and user mapping wise, this user has access to all these databases. Permission to connect database engine is granted. Okay, fine. This might be the reason. Let's go to the database called King. Properties. And connect database engine is enabled. Securable server. You can even grant individual permissions for this user. And this particular database, King user, it is mapped with King user, DB owner, basically. Okay, so you can do all that kind of mapping and everything here. Okay. Yeah. Let's disconnect and connect again. Certificate issue. Trust the certificate. I guess the issue is with some kind of authorization here. Login failed for user King. Okay, I'm not sure why it is failing with this login, but it will treat the user object just like any other schema object. Okay, fine. So this is how DMA can actually help you to migrate from on-premise SQL Server to cloud. And on cloud, we have three databases. We have virtual machine, we have managed instances, and then we have third one, which was, what was the third one? Third one was Azure SQL database. Okay. Yeah. So basically, another benefit of deploying anything on cloud, database deployment on cloud, you get these type of security features. Okay. What is the first feature you get? Network security. You get virtual network. What you can do is you can deploy your database in a particular VNet and then set up a rule saying that only the services in that particular VNet only should be allowed to access your database. You can create firewall rule. You can create network security group. You can create private link so that a selected application only should be allowed to access your database on cloud. Other than that, for database on cloud, you have several authentication options. Azure AD, which is now changed to Microsoft Entra ID, SQL authentication, and Windows authentication. But you get Windows authentication only if you deploy it in VM. You can also use Azure RBAC. What is Azure RBAC? Yes, what is Azure RBAC? Okay, fine. Now, you can also enable roles and permissions right there inside SQL Server VM. And you also can enable something like row level security. Now, I guess row level security is something SQL already provides. Yes, row level security is something that SQL already provides. It's a feature provided by MS SQL. Okay. Then for data encryption, we use encryption in use, always encrypted feature. You have encryption at rest, TDE. So when data is actually stored on cloud, there is a built-in encryption cloud provides, which is called TDE. We have encryption in flight, which is TLS. TLS means whenever any external service is communicating with your cloud database, the interaction is always encrypted. You also have an option of providing your own customer managed keys. Customer managed keys means your encryption keys, instead of using one provided by cloud, you can also provide your own custom keys for encryption. And last one, dynamic data masking. This is again something which SQL Server already provides. There is nothing new Azure provides in here. Anybody here used dynamic data masking? No? Dynamic data masking basically allows you to hide certain important data like social security numbers, PAN numbers, Aadhaar card numbers, and so on. So if your table contains an attribute where certain part of data need to be hidden from the general view, you can do that. That's called dynamic data masking. And this is something SQL actually natively provide. For this, you don't actually have to depend on Azure. This is something SQL already provides. If I launch my SQL Server Management Studio once again, here it is. Let's log in into the database. It is something that is by default supported, and you can enable it on a particular column in your table. Okay, so we have here several options. What I can do is let's select a particular option, particular column, and we can apply dynamic data masking on one of the attribute or one of the columns here. You can even hide a particular column altogether when somebody uses this attribute, select star from. Okay. Yeah. So this feature is irrespective of whether it is cloud or on-premise, it's already provided. Another one is SQL now, Azure now provide advanced threat protection to mitigate some of the issues that might occur or that some of the vulnerabilities your database might have. You can even do an SQL audit. You can integrate with log analytics and event hub. So all your SQL logs will be sent to that monitoring tool. You can do a vulnerability assessment. Vulnerability assessment will simply check if your database has any kind of loopholes that could be exploited by other people. You have data discovery and classification built into it. And you also have Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is basically a security service. You get these benefits when you are moving to Azure database. How do we authenticate to database? I told you one thing. You can authenticate using database administrator, SA. You can authenticate using Azure AD or Microsoft Entra ID. Okay. And you can, if in case of Windows machine, you can authenticate using Windows authentication as well. But that option is available only if it is inside a VM. Okay. This case study is not applicable to you because just a usage pattern. Any question, queries, anyone so far? Fine. Yeah. So this is one type of migration we were talking about. There is also another types of migrations here, like for example, for VM to VM migration, you can also use Azure VM directly for the migration. Just give me a minute. There's nothing much in the migration here. Yeah. Basically, if you are trying migrating anything to Azure, these are the several scenarios out of which The scenario which we are talking about right now in this session is scenario number 2, SQL Server workload migration. But other than SQL Server migration, Azure right now has support for these type of migrations. Okay. Did you see what all different migration services currently supported on Azure? If database is in several terabytes, Ritesh, for bigger size, uh, you need to basically use an offline migration strategy. Okay, where you can manually shift data to Azure data center. Okay, and then migrate it. Okay, I will explain that as well for bigger workload. So these are the options right now. We can do Windows Server, we can do SQL database, Linux workload, SAP HANA applications, and other components. Now, migration tool. There are several migration tools we have. Please remember one thing. The migration tools here are like, for example, we have already used a tool called Azure Data Migration Assistant. Okay. We have already used Database Migration Assistant tool. What this tool actually does, database migration tool, it allows me to migrate my on-premise data to cloud. Similarly, there is a migration tool available for virtual machines that you should use in case of SQL Server VM. Okay, Azure migration tool for machines. You can also use an offline migration tool called Azure Data Box. Now, this is an interesting concept now, Ritesh. Okay, we'll talk about it. So, as I told you earlier, there are two options for migrating your database, an offline and an online. What did I tell you about offline migration? Requires you to shut down the database and application downtime will begin. Online migration is basically the one where you can limit the downtime by cut over to new environment when migration complete. But this will take more time and it will also require continuous synchronization of live data. What do you mean by continuous synchronization of live data? Hello? Yes. Now, what if you are performing an online migration and while your migration is going on, your application is still in use and there is new volume of data getting generated. So please remember one thing, while your migration is in online, let's take an example of a typical banking sector. Every day, data worth several gigabytes to terabytes is generated every day, depending upon their operations and operation scope. So while you are performing an online migration, you have to continuously keep synchronizing live data. Okay. Yes. And then there would be a cutoff point where you migrate or you start using Azure database instead of using your local database. Okay. Please remember, before you actually start a migration, you have to do an assessment. Now, do you know that most of the organizations hire external expert for migration activity? What they do is they hire an expert, cloud expert, and the expert will then guide a team for migrating a data, migrating their database. Now, online migration. Yeah. If any changes are happening, that integrity will be maintained. Now, Ritesh, please remember, even in case of online migration, there would be a cutoff time when you will actually take a small downtime to make sure your application connects to a new database instead of old database, right? But normally it happens in phases. Okay, in phase one, you are still connected to local database and local database is getting synced or getting migrated to remote database. And it will keep happening. Okay, then they will schedule a downtime window when they'll do the cutoff, then when they will do the uh, failover kind of, and then start using a new database. Even after starting using new database, you will keep your old database in sync so that if any kind of bug occurs or if any difficulty arises, you should be able to quickly move back to your old database quickly. Now, what in case of unstructured data? Now, we were talking about structured data, but what if there is a unstructured data that need to be migrated? Okay. Now, what is unstructured data? Files, binary files, Excel, Word documents, legal documents, PDF files, audio, video files, any kind of binary file, basically. Now, in data migration, you have to make sure that you are able to migrate all that data as well. Okay. What you can do here is, in case of unstructured data, you can use Azure File Sync to migrate your data. How many of you have used something like OneDrive or Google Drive? Cloud-based services for storage. They allow you to sync data, local data with cloud storage. Yeah. Yeah. So basically what's going to happen is all the local data that you want to transfer from local machine to cloud, you can make Azure File Sync service for that. Now, what is Azure File, first of all? Azure File is a cloud storage service that uses internally your file sharing protocol, SMB protocol, SMB oblique CIFS protocol. Okay. SMB protocol basically allows you to map that cloud storage as a network drive in your cloud VM. So you can have a virtual machine on cloud and you have Azure file share, not file sync, Azure file share on cloud. You can use that Azure file share inside your Azure VM as a network drive and keep all data there. But this service is for cloud storage. How do I link that with my local files and folders? To link that with your local files and folder, there is a service you can use called Azure File Sync. But by the way, you can do this without file sync also. What if it is a single one-time migration? For one-time migration, do you know there are tools available that allows you to do this type of migration? You can use Azure Storage Explorer, which is a GUI tool, or you can use uh, Azure File CLI. Okay, AZ File CLI, a CLI command line interface for you know working with Azure File Share. That command line allows you to copy local files to Azure and Azure files to local. It also has support for scripting. You can create a PowerShell script or you can create a Linux Bash shell script to automatically transfer all the data from local machine to cloud machine. In case of larger databases also, you can just treat it like a normal binary files, transfer them to the what we can call it to the cloud database, right? And then once the transfer is done, once bunch of the data, the old data is already transferred, then for new data, you use the standard database migration. Are you getting my point? Hello. Another way to actually make your database migration faster is first migrate old data as a binary files, migrate it on the server so your schema is already populated. Later, you just have to sync the new data to it. Okay, but that requires a proper study of your entire data and its scope, its size, and everything. Okay, fine. So Azure File Sync now, as a service, Azure File Sync will have two endpoints, a cloud endpoint and a local endpoint. On cloud endpoint, it will connect to Azure File Share. And in local endpoint, it will connect to your local disk drive or your local folder, just the way you connect it with Azure, sorry, you connect it with OneDrive. How many of you have used OneDrive? Yes, like OneDrive. So you can sync the data from local folder to cloud and cloud to local folder. Okay. Works in both hybrid and cloud migration. What is hybrid? Hybrid environment is when you continue to use local environment and cloud environment both. That is called hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is when you continue to use your on-premise and your cloud resources. It works for them. You can transfer data and metadata both. And you can also combine it with other Azure services called Azure Data Box. And there are several pricing services or pricing tiers available right now. Okay. So what you can do is you can connect or you can use Azure File Sync. Okay. Connect it with Azure File Share as a cloud endpoint. Connect it with your on-premise data as a local endpoint. Connect it to your local servers, on-premise servers, and start synchronizing your data. Okay. You can rapidly share all kind of binary contents over a network faster to Azure. But please remember, this also has a limiting factor, your connection speed. How exactly you are connected to Azure. If you are using a regular connection like the one I am using right now, I'm using a local broadband connection, okay, to connect to internet. And my Azure connectivity is based on my internet connectivity. Now, do you know that Azure also provides a kind of dedicated connectivity to Azure data centers from your on-premise machine? Are you aware of those options? Yes. Yes, yes. Point to point. I'm talking about express route. Okay. You have two types of connectivity with between Azure and on-premise data center. One is VPN, which uses public internet, and the other type of connectivity you can perform is express route that provides a dedicated connection, dedicated connectivity. With that connectivity, the connections transfer or connection speed will even further improve. And it provides a safe and secure way to migrate your data from your local on-premise data centers to your cloud data center. Now, in case of hybrid cloud, it will not be a migration, but it will be a sync, data sync. Okay, because you will not stop using your on-premise data if it is hybrid environment. Whereas migration means you will copy all the data to Azure and then you will stop using local data. Then it would be called migration. Now, can we do this type of large data migration offline? And there is a service available to do that. Here we have something called Azure Import Export Service. Now, Import Export Service is available in offline and online mode as well. If you want to use offline mode, there is something called Azure Data Box. Yeah, we will talk about it, but let me just show you how it looks. Then I will show you an example of virtual machine migration. But before that, let me take you back here as your data box. This is how they look like. Here it is. Can you see this? This is data box. This is data box disk, and this is data box heavy with gross capacity of 100 TB, 80 TBs, and 1 PB, petabyte, like that. This is approximate values only. They look like this. This is a data box, this is a data disk, and this is a data box heavy. This is how they look alike, basically. Data box heavy, as the name suggests, is used for large volume of data, and data box disk is used for small volume of data, around 80 to 70 TB in size. Okay. Wait a second. The size is not actually written here properly. I guess better is to just use Azure documentation page for this. Azure Docs, data box. Here it is. This is the official page where we will find information about it. So for initial bulk transfer periodic update, you can use data box. Okay. And these are the devices currently available. You can see these are the locations where it is currently supported. Okay. So from Brazil, you can destination could be US, from Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Japan, Korea. You can migrate your data to US and EU both, right? This is the dimension for the data box device. And this is how it looks like. This is a standard data box. Okay, it's the actual physical device that you will get. So you have to register for the service. You will receive the data box, connect it to your on-premise machines, network, load all your data and ship it to Azure data center. So you can see the data transfer rate that it offers is up to 80 terabyte in day over 10 Gbp network interface. Okay, and it has RJ45 network connector plus SFP copper 10 GB Ethernet connection. Okay, like this. 100 TB device has 80 TB usable capacity. That means gross size would be this, but after formatting, you get only 80 terabytes to be used. Power consumption and everything is given already. Okay, this is where you will find it, information. Okay, and these are the language codes to use, right? Order receive. The workflow would be you place an order. After you place an order and provide the shipping details, you will receive the device. Now, once you receive the device in your on-premise data center, connect the cables, configure the connectivity, power it on, transfer your data. Once you transfer the data, you are supposed to prepare, turn off, and ship the device back to Azure data center, right? Once you send to Azure data center will receive those disks, connect to their servers, and upload all the data. Okay. And please remember, after the data is uploaded, the device is securely erased as per NIST guidelines. I'm not sure, but they literally just throw the disk out once they are used. Okay, and make it irrecoverable. So your data remains safe. Okay. You can find more information about that later. There is also data box disk, which is a smaller one. Here it is. The smaller version of Azure Data Box is called Data Box Disk, which provides limited, you can say size, up to 35 terabytes of data you can transfer. Okay, and it would be actually a 2.5-inch SSD with storage capacity 40 TB, out of which 35 TB you could use. Okay, and it actually contains 5 disks. To 5 disks, individual disk storage capacity would be 8 terabytes roughly. Okay, and what about DataBox Heavy? DataBox Heavy is the one that is actually a heavier component, and it is literally for several thousand, about 1,000 gigabytes. Sorry, 1,000 terabytes, not gigabyte. Okay, it would be around 500 lbs. So it's a device with wheels for transport support. It's very huge, and it's around 1 petabyte raw storage. There would be 70 disks of 14 TB each inside that cabinet. So total usable capacity is 770 terabyte. Okay, similar pattern available. You could use this if there is a large volume of data that you wish to import and export, and you do not have dedicated network connectivity to receive that volume of data or transfer that volume of data to cloud faster. So you can use the offline one. But any guess when should I use this type of physical data transfer or offline data transfer views? You should use them for one-time data migration. Is that clear? If it is a one-time data migration, these options are better. Okay, for continuous migration, you should use the online approach. Okay, we'll do one thing now. We'll take a small break for 15 minutes, and post break we will continue the migration, and I will also explain you the virtual machine migration as well. Okay, yeah. Hi, everyone. Let's continue now. Okay. So before going on break, we were discussing about this uh, unstructured data, migration of unstructured data. So when we talk about migration of unstructured data, we can use Azure File Sync, or you can use import export service as well. In case if you use import export service, right, this is how it works. You migrate a large volume of data at one time. So you place an order. Okay, you place an order from Azure data center. You also have to book one, you can say the actual shipment partner, right? And once the order is placed, you will receive the disk. You load your data onto a disk and then send it to data center. So you can export your data same way. You can import your data as well. How import data works? Import data works little different. Now, import is actually an opposite kind of service. Now, what if instead of migrating your data to cloud, you want to download the data from cloud to on-premise? Yes. If you want to download the previously stored data on cloud back to your on-premise data center, you could do that as well. What you can just do is you can just place an order to import the data. So you can get the data or you can upload or download the data both, okay, with import export. There is also an option available for online migration one, where you will get something called Microsoft Data Box Edge device that you can connect to your on-premise network. Okay, if you use that, then it will be called online transfer. It will be then called online transfer if you use Microsoft Data Box Edge device, which is a different type of device, which will sit directly in your data center. Okay, so what are the scenarios you should use this type of import export? For one-time migration, for initial bulk transfer. What is initial bulk transfer? You needed to migrate, let's say, several terabytes or several petabytes of data from on-premise to cloud. So what you can do is you can split your data into two parts, the old historical data and the current data. For old historical data, use initial bulk transfer, use Azure Data Disk Heavy to transfer that data in one single transaction to Azure Data Center. And then for the current data, you can use other approaches. Are you getting my point? Do you know many application users, many organizations who are heavily dependent on data, they have multiple data partitions, like a banking industry, for example. Data for current financial year will be stored in a different database, and data for previous financial years are stored in a different partition. Yes. So there might be a current data and there might be an historical data. So this type of data export import is actually better for that kind of historical data. One time import upload, or you can do a periodic upload. Periodic upload means every 3 months, every 6 months, you migrate some of the data, on-premise data to cloud. Some of the scenarios to export data from Azure: disaster recovery, security requirement, or migrate back to on-premise or to other cloud service provider. So these are several requirements here. What is disaster recovery? Hello, DR, anyone? Am I audible? I hope I'm audible to all of you right now. Yeah. Disaster recovery. Yeah. Kirit. Disaster recovery means what happens if all the data or the services available on your primary endpoint are lost. You lose connectivity there. Disaster recovery. For a disaster recovery, what you could do? Most of the time, disaster recovery scenarios are like this. You have a data and application on premise, and you set up a disaster recovery on cloud. So your primary application is on premise, but your disaster recovery site is on Azure. So when your primary goes down, you recover application through Azure. That is normal scenario, but you can actually make that scenario totally opposite. Like for example, due to some security requirements or data residency rules, you cannot actually upload your data to cloud because of certain statutory requirements. Your data must be in your data centers only, right? Many organizations actually have this type of security requirement where, as per the requirement, as per the guidelines, they are not allowed to store data on cloud because cloud is considered as a third party vendor. You can either store data at your client's data center or at your data center, being a vendor, but cannot store on third party. In that case, you can keep your data on premise, but then use cloud for disaster recovery side. So your primary application is on premise, but recovery site is cloud. So when primary goes down, access the application from cloud. So that scenario we use export data. You can also migrate. Now, what if you are trying to migrate your data somewhere else? So you can export it to your data center first, and then from there you can export it to on any other cloud uh, platform or cloud service provider. Okay, so moving data from one point to another point, you can use this offline migration technology. So now, a basic comparison now. We have few scenarios here. The scenario depends on two characteristics or two attributes: data size or data set size and network bandwidth. Now, what is first scenario here? Try to understand first scenario. You have large data set, petabytes of storage, several terabytes of storage or petabytes of storage, and you have low network connectivity. Your network bandwidth is very low and you do not have direct connectivity, like you don't have anything like express route, for example. So what should I do if my data size is huge and network bandwidth is very slow? With slow network bandwidth, moving your data might take several days or several months as well. In that case, you should use Azure import export or data box for export, data box disk, data box heavy, etc. Otherwise, you can use online import export as well, but it's taking longer time. Offline data export should be recommended when you have large volume of data but low bandwidth. Now, what if you have large data, but you have higher bandwidth? Higher bandwidth means your bandwidth ranges between 1 Gbps to 100 Gbps. Actually, you don't, do you know that most common network bandwidth nowadays is 1 to 100 Gbps? Rather, 1 to 10 Gbps is the most commonly found network bandwidth at many organizations. But let's say if this is the case, you can do online data transfer. What you can do is online data transfer. For online data transfer, you can use Databox Edge or Databox Gateway device, which you can directly place in your data center. Let me show you how it looks like. As your docs, Databox Gateway. This particular device is for online data exchange only. It is used for online data exchange only. Wait a second, I'm getting wrong representations here. Let's say data box age. This will give me the right image. Yeah. Notice this. Hello. Do you think the shape of this particular device is little odd? And it doesn't look like a storage device. Hello. It's because it is supposed to be rack mounted. This particular device is supposed to be rack mounted and it is connected to your local network. It will allow you to, sync large volume of data, on-premise data to cloud. It's called Databox Edge, okay, which is internally used by Azure Databox Gateway. So this device will sit directly in your data center, directly in your server racks. Okay. Yeah. I guess I accidentally closed the file. Let's reopen it. Okay, so you can use data box for that. If it is a large data set with moderate bandwidth means bandwidth in the range of 100 Mbps to 1 Gbps. In that case, you can use Azure Data Box family or Azure import export. In case of high bandwidth network, you can even copy data using AZ copy. AZ copy is basically a basic command line tool that can easily copy large volume of data, medium to large volume of data over a public network. It's a command line tool. You can create a PowerShell or Azure Shell script with AZ copy command. Okay. Then we have a small data set. Small data set means, let's say your data is small and you have low to moderate bandwidth up to 1 Gbps. And if you want to just copy few files, it's much better to use Azure Portal, AZ copy command line, Azure CLI, or Azure Storage Explorer, one of these options to copy your data. Okay. AZ copy is command line tool similar to Azure CLI, but Azure CLI is more, you can say, has more use cases. AZ copy is dedicated for storage copy operations only. Any question about these scenarios now? Anyone? Yeah. No? Fine. So these are several ways you can migrate your data. Okay. Now let's talk about the actual server migration. Server migration means SQL VM migration. Okay. As I told you, there are several tools available for data migration already. Okay. Let me just close this. This database is already up and running, but I guess I don't no longer need this database now. So this is how I'm just going to delete the database first. Delete, and I'll delete the, I will also delete logical database server, data 1012. Okay. Fast services, they do not actually offer any stop button, or even if there is a stop button, it would actually save cost if you click the stop button. Best way to save cost is delete those instances. Okay. I don't have any managed instance right now, so I don't have to worry about that. Let's see if everything is deleted now. What I'll do is I'll go to the resource group, SQLRG. Okay, there is nothing inside this SQLRG resource group right now. Okay, there is actually a master database still available here, but that will disappear in some time. Yeah, gone completely. So now, how about the other migration work? So now, for example, for migrating a virtual machine-based SQL server, there is option available in Azure called Azure Migration Project. Let me show you this option now, Azure Migration Project. Azure Migrate. Okay, so there is a service called Azure Migrate. Now this Azure Migrate service let you migrate lot many different types of servers. You can migrate web servers, application servers, and database servers as well, right? And you will notice one thing, this single service actually provides you multiple options for migration. Like you have database only migration also included in here. If you use database only migration, it will simply give you several tools to migrate your data. Like for example, if I create database only migration project, what I need is a resource group. Let's say, for example, this one. Let's provide a project name, project 101, and you can provide the geography. Let's say my geography here is India. Okay, fine. Public endpoint connectivity. Please remember, you can also have private endpoint connectivity, but that requires a proper connectivity to be set up via probably the what we call it express route. Right now, we are using public endpoint. That means I'm connecting to Azure using public internet. This will create a migration project. Okay. Migration project allows you to, manage all the migration related tasks from the same panel. Did you notice here what it is actually asking me to do? It's asking me to download DMA, Data Migration Assistant from here. But this is the tool I have already used, right? I've already used this Data Migration Assistant tool. What I did was using Data Migration Assistant, I did an assessment. Then we have a tool for migration. This is where you can use data migration service. Okay, data migration service is called DMS. Get started by creating the service instance. This is called migration service instance. Okay, if you need more than these tools, you can actually, start simply migrating the database from here. Remember one thing, sometime back, I have already used Database Migration Assistant, DMA. This is the tool we are talking about for migration of databases. Now, let me show you one thing here. Uh, Wait a second. Looks like all the migration projects have disappeared from here. That's because I actually deleted the database from cloud. So if you do a migration project, if you do create a migration project, what you can do is you can simply provide the project name here, assessment or migration project name. Let's say, for example, project 1, database engine, Azure SQL database. Okay, then connect. Let's say I want to connect to the local database, Windows authentication, trust the certificates, and migrating Northwind database. Okay, start the assessment. Now this assessment, you need to upload this assessment report, upload the remote to Azure. Now this is where I'll select Azure. Please remember there are multiple different, you can say cloud platforms available. Azure is Azure public cloud. Azure China is independent one. Azure Germany is independent one. And Azure US government is independent one. You have access to only Azure. Connect. Now here, it will actually ask me to log in with my Azure credentials. So let me log in here with my Azure account, with my email address, which is linked to my Azure subscription. Okay. After I log in, it will now show my Azure subscription and Azure projects. Looks like I'm not able to connect here. Strong authentication is required. Okay, I guess this is because Microsoft Azure has changed the way authentication works here. So somewhere here I'm getting an error, but once it was successful, I would be able to just log in here with my subscription and Azure Migrate project. So whatever project I have created here, wait a second, this particular project, project 101, that project 101 will appear here. And after I click upload, this particular report here would change. Okay, this particular report here would change, and it will actually allow me to launch database migration service. Okay, I should be able to use the migration service from here, but unfortunately, I'm not able to select it and upload anything to this project from a DMA. Export assessment. Assessment is actually exported as a JSON file, but without upload, it might not work. Let me try one more time. Let's see if it can load the subscriptions now. No, looks like it requires some additional login or something. Maybe two-factor authentication is required for this to work. Okay, let's close this. Yeah. So this will allow you to continue with the migration. Actually speaking, there is no need of DMS here. I have already shown you how you can do a migration directly from Data Migration Assistant itself. DMA itself can do the migration. But in case if you want to know how it is done, from the service, here is the documentation for it. Okay. You can actually do migration using Azure Database Migration Service, DMS. This is how DMS works. Okay, you create a project and then you can migrate a database using this particular project. Now, these are the several options available. SQL Server to SQL Server database, offline migration, SQL Server to SQL managed instance, both online and offline, SQL Server to SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, both online and offline. I'll share the link with you where you can find more information about it. In order to actually try all these things, you need two things. One, Azure subscription, and number two, on-premise database. Okay. So when it comes to online, this is the procedure to perform online with DMS, data migration service. Okay. So what you can do is you can download and install Azure Data Studio, which is basically an independent tool that you can download and install. I will show you how it can be installed in that SQL VM I have created. Okay. Once you do that, you can then connect it to your Azure data center, Azure subscription, and start the migration process. Okay. Now this is the process available for online and this is for offline. Online process, you launch Migration Assistant and you use this particular UI for it. Is that clear? Now you will notice one thing. This particular UI is very similar to Azure Data Migration Assistant, AMA, that I have used earlier, right? Hello? Okay, let's see how this tool is different than the tool that I used earlier. Let's download this tool, Azure Database Migration Assistant. Wait a second, where it is? Here it is. I'll download this. This is the last piece we are discussing, and after this, we will wind up the session by 4:30. Yeah. Here we are. Let's try this different tool, Azure Data Studio. Azure Data Studio, here is the download button. We are using Windows machine, so I will install Windows version, x64-bit, 64-bit Windows. Here it is, Azure Data Studio. If you already use Azure Data Studio, there is no need of Azure Data Database Migration Tool, DMA, that I used earlier. Fine. Installation will take approximately a minute, not more than that. So in this session, I have explained you what all storage services, database services are available on Azure. That was first thing. What are the data platforms or what are different data related services available on Azure, mostly relational database. Then I explained to you Data Migration Assistant, how it works and how we can migrate database using Data Migration Assistant. And now we are looking at Azure Data Studio for migration. Azure actually supports migration of apps, migration of VM, and migration of database. And in this particular course, we are focused on database migration, SQL database migration, to be very specific. Okay, so the tool has launched. This is Azure Data Studio. Several pop-ups are there. I'll just ignore them for a time being. And we can here use this to migrate the database. Let's see what all options available here. You can connect your database from here. This is the search button. Then there are notebooks for script. There are database reports that you can create, extensions which all you can install, and so on. So let's see one thing. Let's see how we can connect here. Okay, so let's say I want to connect my Microsoft SQL Server, and my SQL Server here is on localhost. Localhost means this machine using Windows authentication. Let's see if we can connect. Enable Trust Server Certificate. Yes. Now this will connect to my local database now. Okay, so I have now connected to the local database and you can see a quick summary here. Like this is my Northwind database, for example. This is my Northwind database. This is the complete detail about the database right now. And these are the tables right now. These are the list of tables currently available. This is all the object I have. Okay. And this is the database I wanted to migrate. Yeah. Yes. What you can do is you can connect your cloud database also from the same tool. Now here we can just install SQL Migration Assistant extension here. Now Azure SQL Migration is actually considered as an extension here. So let's go to the marketplace and let's find the extension and install it. Azure Data Studio basically allows you to connect to multiple different type of data storages. So data migration, let us search for data migration. You can see here there are actually two extensions available, one for SQL database and one for Cosmos DB. Cosmos DB is for NoSQL database. If you need to migrate your on-premise MongoDB to Azure, you migrate it to Cosmos DB. Okay, so looks like extension is now installed. And now we should be able to use this extension from Data Studio. So let's see, this is my local database, right? And let's see if we can migrate this database now to another cloud instances. This is the prerequisite. You need to have an account, Azure account, which has privileges for performing these type of what we can say migrations. Once you have everything, you can then connect this with Azure data migration service. So what you have to do is select the server, connect to on-premise database, then click on manage, and then you have to select Azure SQL migration. Okay, that we have done already. Run the database assessment. So what you have to do is Azure SQL migration. Okay, after I install the tool, it should already pop up here, but it's okay. We'll just go to this panel here. We need to sign in with Azure. So let me just click on sign in button. Let me log in with my Azure account here. This will allow me to use my Azure Data Studio. Okay, account is successfully added. That's good. So this account is now already added here. Let's close this. So now I'm going to use this account here for Azure. Okay, and this is my Azure tenant ID. I need to re-authenticate. Okay, this is new. Let me see if it can authenticate easily now. Okay, looks like it has triggered a two-factor authentication for me. Just give me a minute. It has triggered a two-factor authentication, and now I have to provide access token or authentication token, which will be usually my recovery mail is Gmail account. So it will be sent to my Gmail account here. And let's try that. Okay, so it is done now. So in this Active Directory, in which I have Azure subscription, I'm able to connect this account to Azure Data Studio. Here it is connected now. And this is where I have my subscription here. And you can access rest of the services and component from this subscription now. Explorer, source control, extensions. This I have already installed now. SQL Migrate should appear directly on this page itself. So let's go back to the servers. Okay. And this is the database. For one of the database, we can launch a migration now. Servers, localhost. Let's close this and reopen it. Yeah, here it is. General. Azure SQL migration. Now this extension will allow me to migrate this database to Azure. So here it is the option. Now this is a step-by-step wizard. So this is the database I'm trying to migrate. This database is already online. That means I'm trying to perform an online migration. Okay. Offline migration is when I make the database disconnected to users. Fine. So I've selected the database. Let's click next. Now it will run an assessment. Now, there is one interesting thing here that if you are trying to migrate it, it will actually give you options for migration. Did you notice the options now? Hello? So this migration tool actually giving me three options to migrate. It is saying that if you need to migrate this local database, here are the three options. You can either migrate it as Azure SQL Database PaaS. You can also migrate it as SQL Managed Instance PaaS, or you can migrate it as a virtual machine. And did you notice the green tick here? Hello? What do you mean by all these green ticks? Anyone? Any idea? Any logic? Hello? Any guess? Yes, Jenny? It means your current database is already compatible with all these three options. As your data migration assistant is actually telling me that it is now up to you to decide which one you want. But the first preference is given to the PaaS service. Second preference is given to managed instance, which is again another PaaS. And third is VM. So options are available to me right now. Is that clear? Yeah. Now, what I will do, let's click on next button. Now, what is the target platform you want? Do you want to deploy it as a database, as an instance, or as a VM? Let's say I want to deploy it as a database. If I want to use database, then this is the report. Remember, you were getting similar report in Data Migration Assistant tool also. Okay, it is about Windows authentication, which is not recommended here. Okay, for this database. Let's say we want to proceed anyways. Now here, did you notice something different here? Hello? Azure managed instances, SQL managed instance, Ritesh. Only the branding is different in the UI. Okay. When it says Azure managed instance, it is actually referring to, where is my login? It is actually referring to managed SQL instance. Okay. Yeah. Now here you will notice earlier in DMA requires an instance target server to be already ready. And do you remember just 15 minutes back, I have deleted my database created on Azure. Do you remember that? Hello? Yeah, I have deleted that database. Now, this particular data studio actually allows me, this data studio will actually allow me to create a new instance. Let me select the subscription. Let me select the resource group. And I will select the location as well. Wait a second. The tenant ID and everything I have selected, but I'm not able to find any location here. Only region that contains a target. Okay. No Azure SQL database found. Okay, fine. you have to provide the existing database. I don't have a database ready. I thought it will create a database, but not. Sorry. You still need a database. I should not have deleted that database. But anyway, it already has a data imported. So what we can do is we can create a new database and provide the database details here. And then next, and it will then start migrating data there. So let's give it a minute. I'll just create a database quickly. PaaS service, basically, I'm talking about. Okay. So here, let's create an Azure SQL database quickly. You can use multiple options, by the way. In case if you want to deploy it as a managed instance, we can do that also. Let's deploy managed instance because earlier I have already shown you how SQL database service work. This time let's use a different service. So I already have SQL RG. Let's deploy it as a managed instance, DB instance 101, Central India, and this would be not an instance pool. And instance size, let me select instance size here as general. Next generation is disabled. General 8 core. Let's say I want only 4 cores. And for the data, I want only 32 GB of data. Let me check what would be the price here. Around 300 for storage, 40,000 for compute. And general purpose like this. Okay. To enable zone redundant, not required. SQL Server license, I'll say hybrid. And here I'll say locally redundant. Let's apply the settings. So this is my total cost now. Okay. 40,675 would be the cost, right? This is the compute cost. I will use SQL authentication here. Let's say my SQL authentication, I will provide the managed admin user, Mahindra, and password. Same thing I'll use. Okay, not supporting this. Password must be at least 16 characters. Okay, so I need these many characters. Characters, right? Okay, so this would be the estimated cost. General purpose here for managed instance is around this cost. I'm not sure whether I can further reduce this, but managed instance doesn't have a plan less than this, unfortunately. So 4 core selected, general purpose cost is 10,000. Let me check if I can further reduce this by using any other option. No, this is the only option available right now. Okay, fine. Let's cancel this. So let's go to the networking, make sure it is accessible from public Azure services. Security, I'll just not use any security principle right now. Additional settings, same things, and review and create. Let's wait for it. Deploying a managed instance is a long running operation, takes 6 hours to complete. I guess I should not have tried this. Managed instance allocation itself is a time consuming task. Fine. Anyway, if that instance was ready, I would have done the migration here. Okay, so once the migration is done, it will be reflected here. Select the subscription, select the location, select the resource group. Resource group will be auto filled up. Next finish and migration complete. Yeah. Any questions so far about migration, anyone? Hello? Any questions, any queries? Anyone? Yeah. So to review whatever we have discussed so far, number one, this particular course was about migrating SQL SQL workload to Azure. When we say SQL, we are referring to SQL database, right? For SQL database, the target available on Azure is, there are three targets available. Either you migrated as Azure SQL Database VM, or you migrated as managed instance, or you migrated as what is the other option available for us? Azure Database, Azure SQL Database. These are the three options available. All the three options I discuss with you. What are the differences in these three? Like when you deploy SQL Server, there are three options, and then all the three options will offer. Sorry, this is directly database creation. All the three options have their own plus and minus point. Okay. If you use virtual machine, it gives you direct support for the underlying operating system, the Windows operating system. You can RDP into it, and it provides 100% compatibility with your local on-premise database. But if you connect to managed instance is a PaaS platform where underlying hardware will be configured by Azure. Okay, managed by Azure, and you can just connect it using Azure SSMS or any database client tool. Okay, then we have last service, which was Azure PaaS service, Azure SQL database, which is a cheaper and where everything, it's a fully managed service, everything Azure manages. Once you identify what should be the target, then you can take an existing database and start migration. Okay, there are two different tools you can use for database migration. One is Azure Migration Assistant, okay, that we have tried earlier. And second is Azure Data Studio. Azure Data Studio can connect to any Azure database, even the NoSQL database as well, right? And it has an extension which can be used for data migration. Another tool which you might use is Azure Server Migration, but it is used for virtual machine migration, not for instance migration. Any questions, queries, anyone? Okay, so Saili, you can take over now. Just wait
Yes.
few minutes. You can take over now.
Sir, Ritesh has posted some query in the chat box. Will you please check?
Wait a second. What to do if some tables are having data in GBs? Ritesh, if some tables have data in GBs, that's one solution would be split the migration activity into two or three parts. Migrate the heavier database tables first and migrate rest of the table schema later, because migration assistant allow you to do that. Okay, that is one thing. Number two, why your tables are having GBs of data? There could be two scenarios there. Either there are just too many records in it, right? Then you need a proper data partitioning. What you can then do is customize the process to make sure you are migrating not all the data, but just some of the old data. Data should be partitioned properly. Number two scenario, if your database tables have data in GBs, another reason could be using some kind of what we call it, large object data, LOB. There you need database modernization. You will have to make sure that all the LOB data, large object binary data, should be converted into a blob and stored in Azure storage account instead of storing them in a database. Okay. Hope that helps. Any other question?
But if the tables are the transaction tables and that uh,
Mhm.
those tables are having dependency on other tables. So if we will migrate one by one, or then
Yes, yes,
those
that would be that.
dependency will
Yeah,
be,
right,
how
right.
we will maintain
Understood.
those dependency.
Right, right. The dependency, maintaining dependency would be issue. You are right, because if we try to import a data and related tables are missing, it will raise an error, right? So the approach, the right approach would be you have to split your data into an older data and current data. Okay. One way to do that is just do the schema import export first. Okay. Just do the schema import export. And for actual data export, the data query export, what you can do is log in into your database, run queries to fetch old data up to certain date.
Okay.
Okay. And import that old data first into your database. But then the tricky part is you have to create a custom query to fetch only selected records.
Hmm.
Okay. Like for example, if there is a sales database, so you specify that I want to migrate everything till December 24th, right? Generate a query, migrate it while you are still connected to your current database, local database. Okay.
Okay.
Now, while the migration is taking place, after the migration is done, you need to also do a verification whether both the databases have same data, right? Whether the data is synced properly.
Hmm.
After that, then you plan an activity to migrate rest of the data. So you can, partition your data into two partition, current data and old data to do that migration. Because if tables are in several GBs, migration will take time to transfer that volume of data from one database to another database, from source DB to target DB, right? Okay. Do you know that in SQL Server, databases are actually, real databases actually stored in several binary files, which are stored in a data directory on SQL Server, right?
Yes. Hmm.
So there is another way of migration where we use VM migration. What we do is we take the on-premise machine and migrate it to Azure directly. So on Azure, you get the similar machine with same folder, same data, same users, same SQL Server software, right?
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, but again, the same thing. Even though we are doing bit by bit copy of it, it all depends on your database, sorry, your connectivity, how much bandwidth you have. So if you have a less bandwidth, use offline data export import. Okay. Your on-premise virtual machines will be, virtual machine hard disk will be converted into VHD, VHDX. I guess VHDX is not supported. VHDs, virtual hard disk. Write those virtual hard disks to data disk, ship it to Azure data center. And Azure data center, it will be then imported into your storage account. And then there you can provision a new VM from those existing VHDs. Okay. But this would be then offline. It will happen totally means while your database is still in use, but that database, either you can keep using the on-premise database for some time while this old data is getting completely migrated, right? Now, once you have the old data there, then run a migration queries to migrate only the last piece of data that is still there on old system.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So if data size is too high and your network connectivity is not that good, it's better to do an offline migration of VM, virtual hard disk, basically, and then migrate remaining data. Okay, maybe last data for last 2, 3 months.
Okay.
You can also use snapshot, VM disk snapshot.
Other participants, if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat box. And if you don't have any questions or queries, you are clear with the theory or sir have explained, please drop no questions or yes in the chat box. Okay, I'm assuming that everyone is clear with the theory and the knowledge Sarah provided. Well, now we can, I guess, conclude this session. Well, before ending this session, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time from your busy schedules to attend this session. Thank you so much sir, for conducting this webinar. Well, I'll share the feedback form link and redemption link. So make sure you redeem your learning achievement back. And it will be great if you redeem this now. So if you're facing with any issues, I can help with that. And please submit your feedback. Everyone, you can leave this session after redemption of the learning achievement badge and filling the feedback form. Well, if you have any other doubts, you can post it in the chat box. Participants, please leave the session as due to some technical error. We cannot end this webinar from our side. And as the session is already over, you can leave the session now. Have a great day ahead.